Hello, welcome, bienvenidos to this Astro Homage of Dr. Ernesto Guevara. I'm really enthusiastic about presenting this. It's an extraordinary chart that embodies the life of an extraordinary person. And we're going to be looking at the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're not going to be looking at this through rose-colored glasses or telling a certain version of history. We're going to look at this integratively as is my style and as each human being deserves. But before we begin, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Cassandra. I am a Cuban-trained medical doctor who now exclusively practices natural and traditional modalities, mostly Ayurvedic, functional, and astrological wellness modalities. So here we go. I'm going to share this chart. Here we go. Now, for those who don't know, Ernesto Guevara was an Argentinian physician who, after graduating from medical school, went on a road trip with his best friend, Alberto Granado, who I had the enormous pleasure of meeting when I studied medicine in Cuba. And it was on this trip that these two young people were radicalized when they saw the extreme misery and exploitation that local and indigenous people were receiving at the hands of foreign entities, foreign corporations, who were exploiting them for profit on their own land with their own natural resources. And this really, set his trajectory in motion. From there, he went to do, a lot of political work in Nicaragua, which is where he met his first wife, Hilda Galea. And she was from Peru. She was an economist and a radical revolutionary who had been exiled from her homeland. And she actually was the person who introduced them to the Castro brothers, Fidel and Raul, who were in exile in Mexico, planning their revolutionary return and the onset of their revolution in Cuba. So he went to Cuba, really became an integral part of this revolution, provided a lot of medical assistance and training in this endeavor, and rose to a prominent leadership position. And it was when Cuba decided to become allies with the USSR that he felt that the independent status of the revolution was being compromised, and he decided to then go on and join the revolutionary struggles and bring his experience as a guerrilla fighter to first the armed struggles that were happening in Africa, and then back to Latin America, which he identified with, very closely, being from Argentina. So he considered that his pueblo in a more Pan-American sense. And it was there he was captured and killed by US-backed mercenaries when he was 39 years old. So all of this happened in a very short amount of time. Fue una estrella fugaz, and like many people who are internationally known or whose legacy lives on throughout history, he really embodied his chart. So I'm looking forward to presenting that. So here we go. Let's start off with this first house. His rising sign was Aries. And somebody with an Aries rising sign is reinforced in early life for being brave, for taking action, for being fearless. And so we see that here. His ascendant is conjunct Uranus very, very closely. We can see it's the same degree. So Uranus and the ascendant are one. And Uranus is the planet of radical change. It's the usurper. It's the inventor. It's the revolutionary. And so this is a very clear indication of, what was meant to be. And before I begin, I have got to back it up because if anybody's already noticed, so Che Guevara's birthday is celebrated 14th of June around the world. Many people have committed this date to memory, as I did. And what happened is, at some point, an astrologer approached his mother and said, there's no way that June 14th, 1928 could possibly be the birthday of your son. He did not embody that chart. That chart doesn't really contain the factors for the life that he lived. And his mother said, you're right. I confess, he was born May 14th. I was 3 months pregnant when we were married. And then, and so, at the time, especially, this was pretty scandalous. And in order to avoid the judgment and the prying eyes of their community, her husband took a job in a rural area where they carried out the pregnancy and where their first child was born. And when they returned to their community, they returned with this big, beautiful, hearty baby, and said that he was born premature on June 14th, so that the dates would all line up. But truly, he was born May 14th. And while I, as a Gemini sun, was Sun, Moon, and Mercury person, I have a lot of Gemini energy. And so while I was very disappointed to lose perhaps the member of Team Gemini with the most gravitas, his chart makes so much more sense now. And I discovered the truth because as I was investigating this, I wrote to the website where I found his chart, and I said, I'm sorry, but you're misinformed. Ernesto Guevara's birthday was June 14th, not May 14th. And I received a very brief reply saying, all astrologers know this, go look it up. And I did. And that was a story that I've just presented you. So yeah, he was a Taurus, not a Gemini. But you know what? We've still got Prince. So it's all good. But anyway, different kind of rock star. So yeah, so we're looking in this first house, and we've got the ascendant conjunct Uranus, which is just like por encima de la ropa, and just like right there at the surface. It was like the first light cast upon this person is that of a revolutionary and a change maker. Also in this house, we see Jupiter, which just kind of magnifies and expands every area that it touches. And so, all of that boldness, all of that bravery, all of that, leap before you look energy is just expanded here in this first house, the house of self, in the sign of the warrior. And then, we see that there's this trine here, this grand trine in the fire sign. So a lot of energy, and we'll go on to talk about these other placements, but there was a lot of that fire energy, a lot of that boldness and bravery. So now let's move here to the second house in Taurus, which is where his sun belongs, not over here in Gemini. So we see that we have the Sun, Venus, and Chiron in the steadfast, long-term committed sign of Taurus in the house of values. Taurus is a feeling sign. It is the most grounded sign. It is the earthliest of earth signs, and it's fixed. It starts something and it gets it done. If Che had been a Gemini, he would have flaked out on the Castros and probably been late to the boat before departing to Cuba. But no, he was a Taurus, so he had this steadfast energy, this committed energy, and committed to his values, right? And then Venus is the ruler of this house, and it's in this house. And Venus describes, beauty, love, values, what it can be money, but really it's values. It's where you place emphasis on things. And this Venus is conjunct Chiron, which is a point of pain. It is a wound that we have that may not ever, fully heal, but which we can use to motivate, inspire, teach, and heal others. And as we'll see later on, this point is making a cooperative angle to a very sensitive moon in Pisces in the 12th house. But we'll get to that in a bit. Let's move on to the 3rd house, where he does have a Gemini placement. It's Mercury. So it's a quick, intelligent mind. It's a communicative mind. And it's in the house of communication. It's in the house of local community. And as I said, he did speak on behalf of Latinoamericanos, right? And so, as we'll see later on, there are some disconnects and there are some like inconjunctions in his chart. But he did want to represent his local community. And he has his North Node there. So this is a new place for him, this sense of like belonging in this close-knit context. And in this sign of the mind, and in this sign of like concepts, intellectualism. And at some point, somebody in I think it was the FBI, who were, always trying to take him down, said something like, Guevara is very intellectual for a Latino. And I mean, the man was a medical doctor, but it was just like, yeah, he's pretty smart for a Latino. He was exceptionally intelligent, undeniably intelligent, and even his enemies could not deny that. And then this, there is also a cooperative sextile angle between this Gemini energy, between this, outspoken intelligence, and over here, this warrior spirit in Aries. So moving on to the 4th house of home, heritage, roots, family, we have Pluto in Cancer. And Cancer is also associated with the home and heritage. And Pluto is intensity. It is radical change. It is, digging things up and breaking them down and turning them into something else so that new life can emerge and grow. And my astrology teacher, Heather Elin, compares Pluto to compost. And I feel like that is such a rich, developed metaphor for this energy. And it's just like breaking things down to create that fertile soil so that something else can grow. So let's look at this. Let's look at this Neptune in the 5th house. So the 5th house is creative pursuit. So it's creation, recreation, procreation. So it's also, it's what brings you joy. It's also children. It's romance. And he has Neptune here. Neptune is very dreamy, very idealistic, spiritual, but it's also very nebulous, and it can cloud the perspective. And as we see, it is in conjunct Mars in Pisces, and it's the ruler of this house and the ruler of this sign. The modern ruler is Neptune, and it's making an angle of disconnect. This is 150 degrees. So it's, astrology is like the physics of light. So these two can't see each other, right? And so, yeah, it can cloud the vision. Elche was very idealistic, and before he went off to, before he left Cuba and left his children in Cuba to fight in foreign wars, he wrote them a beautiful letter. And it was very much from a revolutionary perspective. That was his entire reason for existing. And he wanted his children to embody these ideals. But at the same time, it's written very lovingly, but it's also forcing children to live in an adult world before their time. And while it does explain, the heroics, and the ideals behind what he was doing, it really put a lot of pressure on them to be like him. And so we see that there. So, he spent the earlier part of his life just being a kid and wasn't radicalized until after medical school. But his children had the Mars aggressive pressure of idealism, Neptune, and bravery, Leo. That expectation they were supposed to have been born into. So Virgo in the sixth house, day-to-day routine. He was a good, meticulous record keeper and leader. And that's what made him very, effective. And Virgo was the helper. And the sixth house tells you about how people treat those who work for them. So he was a very helpful leader. Yeah. And it's been documented as such. All right, so now let's look at this house of partnership and one-on-one relationships, because we have Libra there. And again, the ruler of this house is Venus, and we have Venus in the second house of values. Dr. Guevara was married twice. First to Guerilla, who, as I mentioned earlier, was a Peruvian revolutionary who he met doing revolutionary work in Guatemala. They were married after they discovered they were expecting their first child. And shortly after her birth, he went on to Cuba to fight in that revolution. I don't know if he expected never to see them again, but he fell in love with and married his second wife, Aleida March. And he and March were married in the month of March of 1959, right after the triumph of the revolution. They were revolutionaries together. They fought side by side. She was in his unit, his group. Well, 2 months after they were married, his, and the revolution had succeeded, his wife and daughter came over from Latin America to live in Cuba. And it was there that they were confronted with the fact that he had remarried. So legally, he divorced and then married Aleida March twice. And Hilda stayed true to the revolutionary spirit. So she was an Aries. So they identified with each other. And then Aleida March was, I keep saying her name in English, March, was a Libra. So that part is very clear here. Plus, this is ruled by this Venus here in the house of values, and they all shared those revolutionary values together. So yeah, they all stayed in Cuba, and Hilda actually passed away at age 48, I believe, just about 5 or 6 years after Ernesto was killed. She died of cancer, and then their only child together passed away at age 39 also of cancer. And I just feel like there's so much heartbreak involved in this story. But yeah. So we have here in the 8th house of shared resources, like death, taxes, all this, the occult and the stuff that nobody wants to talk about. This is occupied by Scorpio, which is also that, sort of undercover energy, that management energy, like sifting things out for the sake of survival and safety. And so we've got the ruler of that here in the 4th house, Pluto, and then over here in the 12th house, Mars. Scorpio has co-rulers, a traditional ruler, which is Mars, and the modern ruler, which is Pluto. And we can see how the energy here in the house of heritage, as well as the energy in the house of hidden enemies, like the aggressive energy of hidden enemies, is, speaks of his death, his early death. And it's interesting. It's not the first time I've seen a historical figure who was murdered having this Mars in the 12th house. Not to say that everybody with Mars in the 12th house will be murdered, but not at all. But there are certain patterns that exist in astrology, and I've done charts before, or looked at charts of famous figures who met an untimely end through violence. And it's Mars in the 12th house. So let's look at the at the 9th house of expansion, education, adventure, foreign travels. This is a big one. And here we have Saturn, who is the taskmaster. It's discipline, and it's karma and chronos. So the cause and effect of action over time. And here we have a really interesting in conjunction. So again, a disconnect, 150-degree angle between, I don't know, it's 152 degrees, but it's within the orb of 3 degrees for anybody who's interested in that. But this is a disconnect between this house of home and culture, and the planet of intensity in the house of home and culture, and the house of discipline in the house of foreign travels. And so, as I mentioned earlier, he felt very akin to, very aligned with this like Pan-American, Revolución Bolivariano, like a Bolivarian, Pan-American, revolutionary spirit where everybody was in on it together. But he's a light-skinned guy from Argentina, right? And so while the folks in the Northern Hemisphere don't consider him to be white, everybody in the global South does, right? He's phenotypically white, especially when viewed from that lens of the South. So there's this disconnect where he doesn't really see himself as a white, male, young, heterosexual, cisgendered man, and also like a bigamist who broke his wife and first daughter's hearts and like all his kids' hearts. So there's this disconnect between like how he sees himself and like the deepest root, and then who he is, how he's behaving abroad. And I will say this, like across the global South, he is valued and beloved as a hero. His efforts and his inputs are definitely not taken lightly. They're valued. He's seen as a hero around the world. But we also have to like acknowledge and analyze a certain spirit of white male saviorism that was happening here, even though we weren't really talking about these things in the 1950s and 60s, because they were so pervasive and universal. That was there. That was certainly there. So, and this Saturn kind of wraps up this broad angle trine between the fire signs, between Jupiter. So this is the professor, this is the teacher, in the sign of the warrior in the house of self. This is the dreamer and the idealist, and a bit of like confusion in the 5th house of creation, in the sign of the king. And then it is the planet of karma in the sign of the adventurer, in the house of expansion and otherness, foreignness. And so we can see how this energy flows so easily, that when there's a grand trine, the person whose energy this is, or the native of this energy, doesn't even experience it as ease. It's so easy that it just feels natural, and they take it for granted that it's unique to them. So let's look at this 10th house of career, public reputation, and legacy. And so the midheaven is there in the sign of Capricorn, and Capricorn is a severe energy. It's a disciplinarian energy. It is, it's all work, no play. It's a climbing, achieving energy. And he was very ambitious with his goals, and very ambitious with, his vision of the world. And we can definitely see that it's again a severe energy, and sometimes his legacy is viewed by some as being very severe. For example, for the sake of transparency, and so that the post-revolutionary like war criminal trials weren't being hidden and could not be manipulated by the press, he decided to televise them, the trials and the execution of war criminals. And I will say, the war crimes that happened, from the side of the Batista regime, the U.S. imposed Batista dictatorship was outrageously cruel. I don't believe in capital punishment as an individual. But I will say there was enormous cruelty on the part of that regime, and it was habitual, and it was so nonchalant. And so typically when somebody went in front of the firing squad, it was because they had done some really awful things. So having said that, but yeah, for the sake of transparency, and so that it could not be manipulated because they were in such a vulnerable position, like having basically taken on the biggest empire in the world, the United States, which had been controlling Cuba, they didn't want to leave anything up to the imagination. But at the same time, it was pretty shocking to see these trials and these executions on TV, which was a very new medium at the time. So let's look at this, this 11th house of the collective, of the community, of associations by choice in the radical revolutionary sign of Aquarius. Aquarius is the scientist and the liberator and all these things. And we can see that the traditional ruler of Aquarius is here in this 9th house of foreign affairs and expansion, and also, his educational background too is what he brought to that as well. The seriousness and the sobriety of a medical doctor in a revolution. And then the modern ruler of Aquarius is Uranus, which is right here, very tightly conjunct his ascendant, and very tightly conjunct that identity as a revolutionary. All right, so now let's move to this 12th house. And when we're done looking at this chart, we're going to look at some quotes, and so much of what Che had to say is coming from this place right here. So as an Aries rising, his chart ruler is this Mars right here. And even though they're not conjunct, they're very much affiliated, this Mars and this moon, and they don't necessarily make the best company. The moon is feeling, the moon is emotive, more so in Pisces. Pisces is a very psychic sign. It's a transcendent sign. It's the boundaries are blurred, and so it's a what's yours is mine and what's mine is yours energy, and it's feeling other people's feelings energy. And then Mars is Mars doesn't always do well in Pisces, but here it was like, well, let's take action, immediate action on our feelings and our ideals. So this is somebody who went on this, after studying medicine, which can be very idealistic and altruistic, depending on, who the person is. So after doing this, study in a helpful profession, and then being radicalized by the misery and the suffering he saw, he felt those feelings, he felt that misery, and then he was moved to action by it. And so this is kind of like the gemstone of this chart, and explains so much. I mean, it all does. It's all so very indicative of the life he lived, but this was his impetus. The 12th house is also the house of dreams. So the dreams that he had for the future of the world are here, based on like these deep, loving feelings and the compulsion to bring them to action. So here we also see a very cooperative energy between, well, first there's a trine between the moon and Pluto. And again, that's an easy like flow of energy between emotions and intensity in two water signs, which are also very emotive, very feeling signs. And then they each make a sextile, which is a cooperative energy to Venus. That's the heart here in this house of values. So again, it's dreams, it's heritage, dreams, and values, all in this like beautiful cooperative energy that really motivated him to take action on his ideals. So yeah, that is the chart. There's also like some difficult energy here between like or some challenging energies here between the ideals of Neptune in Leo and the identity of the sun in Taurus. So ideals and identity, we were talking about that before, like how he saw things versus how he was seen. Or what he did and what he dreamed of versus what he was doing, and sometimes how that impacted others. There's also a square energy between, or an energy of friction between the emotions, the emotional moon in Pisces, and the very dry, quick, intellectual energy of Mercury and Gemini. So yeah, so I want to also share some quotes that are very reflective of this chart, and some of them come along with this iconography that we're used to of El Che. So it's, and I believe this is from the letter to his children, and it's, remember that the revolution is what's important, and each one of us alone is worth nothing. So we see this, with this first house of Aries, like this is the revolution, with this, with Uranus here, and Uranus rules this 11th house of the collective. So like alone, we're nothing, like the collective is everything. All right, here, the revolution is not an apple that falls when it's ripe. You have to make it fall. So here we're talking about this like Taurus energy of doing, the practical earthly applications of making something happen, and also the action represented by Aries and Mars. So it's that action taking energy and that earthly material energy. It's manifesting something on the physical plane. And it's also this, this connection between these two spaces, this like feeling Pisces and this doing Taurus, which is just such beautiful cooperative energy. So why does the guerilla fighter fight? We must come to the inevitable conclusion that the guerilla fighter is a social reformer, that he takes up arms responding to the angry protests of the people against their oppressors, and that he fights in order to change the social system and keeps his unarmed brothers in ignominy and misery. And that word is new to me, but it means dishonorable behavior. So it's changing, that he is compelled to change the system that oppresses others. And that's he feels like that is his duty in life. So this duty boundness, these values, and this taking action. And then the commitment of Taurus to do it until you can't do it anymore, like to fight till your last breath. So we see all of those characteristics embodied in this chart. If you tremble with indignation at every injustice, then you are a comrade of mine. So, justice again is Libra, ruled by Neptune in the second house of values. And then, this camaraderie is something that we can find in the 11th house, which is ruled by this Uranus in the first. And camaraderie we can also find here in this third house of close relations, in Gemini, where his mind and also the destiny of his North Node were. So let's see. Above all, always be capable of feeling deeply any injustice committed against anyone, anywhere in the world. So again, feeling injustice. It's this Pisces moon. It's this Venus and Taurus, and it's the feeling and the doing, like feel that injustice. And this is again words to his children, which they were not ready for, but it left this legacy of idealism and explaining his eventual absence. So we must struggle every day so that this love of humanity becomes a reality. And again, love of humanity, these great, beautiful, like feeling ideals, all mixed in with this Pisces energy and this revolutionary Aries and Uranus energy, becomes a reality. So it pushes through and translates through the material world, like through the values, into that Taurus energy of like putting one foot in front of the other until it is accomplished. We cannot be sure of having something to live for unless we are willing to die for it. So again, we see this, death in the 8th house, and the sacrifice of Pisces, related with emotion and also action. And again, and it's all tied into those values. All right, let's see. Oh, this is the one for his Saturn in the 9th house for sure. Many will call me an adventurer, and that I am, only one of a different sort. One of those who risks his skin to prove his platitudes. And so we see that Saturn in the 9th house, which also rules this house of legacy and reputation, what he's known for. And yeah, Saturn for a very long time is connected with death, and it still can be in many instances and like great life lessons. But this is an energy of severity, and like, yes, this is a house of adventure and a sign of adventure. It's also a sign of philosophy and expansion with this severe and sobering energy. And this Saturn, again, rules this house of career and public reputation and this midheaven, which is his legacy, and also this house of the collective. So he very much spoke to like these placements in his chart. Here, I now know by almost fantastic conformity with the facts that my destiny is to travel. So again, this is this ninth house, destiny is, conformity, Saturn, travel, expansion, foreign affairs, is the embodiment of that energy. I am not a liberator. Liberators do not exist. The people liberate themselves. So again, it is this, there is no self as far as he's concerned, because he has this radical energy of Uranus conjunct this, the light that is cast on him in this rising sign in this ascendant. And then this Jupiter just expands and amplifies this. So there is no self as far as he's concerned, because he belongs to the people, the revolution, and he is acting Mars on their behalf here in the 11th house of the collective. So the desire to sacrifice an entire lifetime to the noblest of ideals serves no purpose if one works alone. So again, it's the acknowledgement that he as an individual is nothing. But then also there's that chart ruler is in the 12th house. And sometimes the energy of the 12th house can sublimate certain energies. So again, like Aries is a highly individualistic sign, but the ruler of that sign is in this 12th house, which is the sign of, merging, and that, and which he's so emotionally attached to with that moon there. So the sense of self, or the concept, or the recognition of self is being sublimated here and then diverted to the collective over here in the Uranus ruled 11th house. Okay, and this is a big famous quote, and this is also like the very very Pisces moon energy. At the risk of seeming ridiculous, let me say that the true revolutionary is guided by great feelings of love. It is impossible to think of a genuine revolutionary lacking this quality. And so often he did speak of this unbounded feeling of love and empathy. And that's so very clearly embodied in his chart. All right. And I didn't find this in English, but I found it in Spanish. Hay que endurecerse sin perder jamás la ternura. You've got to learn to become hard without ever, or tough. You have to learn to become tough without losing your tenderness. And again, Mars, and that's really Mars in Pisces and the moon in Pisces in action. So I will always dream and never stop until I am dead. So chart ruler as a malefic in the 12th house, and also ruling this 8th house. So these are dreams. The 12th house is dreams. And the 8th house is death. And so he's not going to stop dreaming until he is dead. And I believe I have one more. We must not let these harsh times destroy the warmth in our hearts. And that applies today. And even right now, presently, we have, and I will take us over there. We have a lot of interesting energy. This is the chart for right now, very now at this moment, or well, a few minutes ago, where we have the Sun and Mercury in Gemini, which is communication, and intellect and intelligence, and and then all of this energy here in Taurus, the moon will be joining these planets here in Gemini later on today. But for right now, it is conjunct this revolutionary, radical, change-making Uranian energy. And it is also sharing space with the North Node of Destiny and the professorial and aggrandizing, amplifying energy of Jupiter. We also have over here in Pisces, we have Neptune, who's squaring this sun in Gemini. And so we've got to be very careful with our messaging. The moon is going to be joining this, configuration pretty soon, later on in the day, and tomorrow, especially tomorrow, and in the days ahead. So for that new moon, and it's going to be squaring Neptune in Pisces, which can be very kind of tricky and kind of like distort things. So if we're distorting communication or distorting messaging, we have to look out for that. And then Saturn is also going retrograde in this sign. So we've got to, this is a good time for review and reconnection with a lot of these spiritual energies and the way that we're thinking about them and the way that we're talking about them. And then the very grounded applications of how we are carrying out change and what fuel, how we're amplifying things in the world. So if you haven't already, I invite you to check out my Pisces video, which has a lot. It's here on the channel, and it's got a lot of great information on how to work on detoxing and how to work with the lymph system, which is ruled by Pisces. And between that and the Gemini video, there's a lot of really great information on working with the current energy toward the improvement of wellness. And, once we're all free to feel good and to be well, then the more energy we're going to have on changing things for ourselves and others. So with that, I thank you for spending this time with me and sharing this time with me. And I gotta go. Thank you.